Welcome to KJV Cafe. Thanks for taking time out of your day to listen. Each episode of the Cafe is dedicated to studying the Bible verse by verse from Genesis through Revelation. Your host here at the Cafe is Bible teacher Clark Covington. Looks like the coffee is hot and ready, so let's get started.
Amen. Welcome to the program. Good to be here. Bible teacher Clark Covington. I try to switch it up a little bit. Here today to teach you the Bible. I don't know. I should just do my own introduction from now on. I think that would work well. Hello, and then you hear me again. Oh no. I'm just kidding. Look, here we are. I'm just getting my notes straight. The last couple episodes, we've been looking at the consequences for what took place in the Garden of Eden. That's all we've been doing. Genesis 3, 14 through 15. It's the punishment for the serpent. That's what it is. Like if you sum it up, if you read that little passage, you said, what is it? It's the punishment for the serpent. And he loses his legs. And guess what? Science tells us that snakes used to have legs. It was news to me some years ago when I first researched it, but it's true. And you can go ahead and research it and you'll see that as well. And we realize that the deeper meaning there is that pride leads to a fall. The pride of Satan led to his literal fall, his literal, gravitational declination. I'll try to think of a clever way to say it. His decline physically, literally. God's like, I'm going to make you an example of what it looks like to fall into sin. You're going to be you wanted to be glorious. You're going to be ugly. You wanted to be praised. You're going to be reviled. Which, by the way, again, is mentioned later on in the Bible, so it's fully in lockstep with how God would have things to be. And as we get all burdened down by the ways of the world and the wicked prospering and so forth, we can just remember that good old serpent where he ends up. Amen? We see here that the woman is also not spared from punishment in Genesis 3, verse 16, and that is what Genesis 3:16 is all about, the woman's punishment. And what do we see? We see she's going to have multiplied sorrows, which again, I just believe that the woman is going to deal with being sorrowful. And conception, even trying to conceive, is going to be really hard. And carrying through the pregnancy is going to be really, really challenging, brutal. I mean, I remember just, goodness, I would say maybe the last pregnancy, the one before that, I don't know, but it was just awful for my wife. She had kidney stones. She could not sleep. I mean, she was just miserable, so miserable that we've really thought twice about her going through that again. It's like not fun. And that is part of the curse. I don't know how fun it was to be pregnant before the curse, but I'm assuming it was just like no big deal because no one was ever going to die. Everything's perfect, and someone could say, well, maybe there was no pregnancy before the curse. And yeah, that could be the case too. I mean, I don't know that the Bible explicitly addresses that previously in Genesis 3 or Genesis 1 or 2, but we see here that, now that this has happened, right, it's going to be bad. And in sorrow, you're going to bring forth children. Think about that, by the way. Who did Eve bring forth? Cain and Abel. Cain kills Abel. I mean, that's pretty awful. So, and again, I think for a mother, what hurts them the most? I think it hurts the most when a child goes astray. I don't think there's anything worse than losing a child, like the child dying or a child going astray. How about that one where you have one that goes astray and falls into sin and kills the other one that hadn't fallen into sin? Could anything be worse? I can't think of anything worse than like if I have two kids and one kills the other. I mean, now I'm missing one child and the other one has absolutely broken my heart for their behavior and took my child from me. I mean, this is the curse being lived out. Guys, when we read this isn't just like for her, right? This is life. This is the consequence of sin. And while we can do nothing to stop Adam and Eve for what they've already done, right? We can't get in a time machine and go back there. We certainly can heed this advice, cling to God with all our heart, mind, and soul, live for him like there is no other day tomorrow, praise his holy name, and do our level best to depart from all sin. Not just the sins that are like, don't blaspheme God. Okay, well, I didn't do that. But how about like the sin of pride? How about the sin of coveting? How about the sin of gossip? I mean, these sins that are carried out by so-called Christians every day, we need to be very careful not to engage in those. And then also, too, a punishment. She's going to have a desire to her husband. Again, that's a punishment. I think she had more independence before, and her husband will rule over her. She'll be subjected to him. And we see that, of course, later on, even in the New Testament, we're told, wives, submit to your husbands. And of course, husbands are told to love their wives. Wives are not told to love their husbands, because the way that God just planned this out here in the Garden of Eden in chapter 3, verse 16, God's already said your desire is going to be there. So God said that your desire is going to be there. So if we're told to love our wives, right, then guess what happens? She's going to reciprocate, and she's going to love us, because that is in the Bible. That is in Genesis 3. Ephesians 5:25 through 27. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. That's Ephesians 5:25. When we do that, they're going to reciprocate and love us. They don't need to be told to love us, because their desires are already to us, because the Bible makes that clear. That he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word, that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. And I could go on, but I'm not, okay? What we'll do is we'll take a break, and we're going to get to the man's punishment, and we'll spend a couple episodes looking at how God deals with the man for his sin. Hang in there, I'll be right back.
You're listening to KJV Cafe. We encourage you to look us up on your favorite podcast app and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Now let's get back to some more in-depth Bible study.
So how is God dealing with Adam? We've seen punishment doled out. And again, it kind of like a drama on stage. We see God first addressing the serpent, who Eve was blaming. Then we see God addressing Eve, who Adam was blaming. And now we get to Adam, verse 17. And we're going to take this thing until 19. 17 through 19, Genesis 3. And unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it. Notice this, by the way, in verse 17. In the previous dealings here, when God's dealing with the serpent, and God's dealing with the woman, God didn't outline things like this. The woman, he just said, I'm going to give you this punishment, right? And with the serpent, he said, because thou hast done this, and I'm going to give you this punishment. But with Adam, he's going to go ahead and outline the sin. Verse 17 of Genesis 3, and unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it. Okay? So what God is saying is, I'm going to go ahead and tell you one more time what you did, the specific sin you did, because you're busy blaming her and she's busy blaming the devil. And guess what? Here you are, back to you. And here's the consequence. Thou shalt not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. There it is. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face thou shalt eat bread till thou return unto the ground, for out of it wast thou taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. Okay, so now we see the punishment. And Adam receives a full explanation. Eve didn't, but Adam did, because he's the head of the house, by the way. Again, that just shows you can learn a lot by forensically just breaking this text down and looking at it. God repeats this sin to help us to understand the consequences are tied to specific actions, regardless if we want to blame so-and-so, right? There's consequences. Our eldest, he opened the fridge and pickles fell out and the jar broke, okay? And he said, well, someone else put it in there wrong, or someone else did that. And I had to say, look, there's consequences. We don't have any more pickles. Okay, now that's a simple example, but there's consequences to our actions, whatever they are. I'm trying to think of a silly one, but let's say you're a parent and you couldn't sleep, okay, for whatever reason, and you oversleep in the morning because you were up late at night and you missed church, okay? Does the child get to go to church? Can a 10-year-old drive themselves to church? No. So you missed church because you overslept, and the consequence is you miss it, and so does your children, right? There's specific consequences to our actions, and God's helping us understand this. And the first part of the punishment is is the ground. Cursed is the ground. Well, that tells me that before this, the ground was not cursed. Now, if I have, I'm trying to think. The Meyer lemon, I love Meyer lemons. So if I have a Meyer lemon seed, I could plant it here in North Carolina, which has very odd weather. One day it's like 70 and one day it's 20, but I could plant it and I don't think it's going to grow. But if I was living in the Garden of Eden, I feel like if I just even thought about the Meyer lemon, or if I just even, I don't know, I just shook the Meyer lemon tree a little bit, lemons would just produce, right? I think that's the difference, is before the ground was not cursed, and now the ground is cursed. And, if farming were easy, everyone wouldn't say it's so hard, and people may think it's easy, but it's not. If farming were fruitful on its own, you would have no need for pesticides and irrigation and all of, the water treatment and soil treatment and nets to cover things and this and that. If you look at the extent that people go to farm and yield a crop, it's incredible, because guess what? The ground is cursed. The same ground that was cursed then is cursed now, and that causes a problem. So literally the ground is cursed. There's also, I think, a bigger kind of example, like a characterization here of work being difficult, but just the ground being cursed. I love tea and matcha tea. I like matcha tea. If you haven't had matcha tea, give it a try. It's tea that's ground up into like a little powder, but before it's a powder, it's just tea leaves. And I was watching a video one time of a tea farm, and like some young people, they were kind of idealistic, and they said, we're going to buy a tea farm. We're going to grow really good matcha tea. And I'm like, oh, let's see this. And man, they were having so many problems. They had to get the old timers to come out of retirement to teach them how to do this, this, and this. And it was crazy, but they had like the bushes of the tea plant covered in almost like a net or like a tarp. And they were doing this to preserve the tea plant from exterior issues that may come from weather or from, insects, etc. The ground is cursed. I love coffee as well. I'm giving away all my passions here today. You know that, though. It's called KJV Cafe. Well, guess what? Read about the Robusta plant. Good, high-quality specialty coffee is Robusta coffee, and there is a horrible, horrible disease that eats away at the Robusta plant. It is awful. It's like a plague, and it's got people worried about it. And guess what? That ground is cursed. Amen. And I won't even try to pronounce this disease. It starts with pseudo, but there's a bunch of different names for it. Coffee rust. There we go. I was searching up real quick. Coffee rust is a good one for me. There's a scientific name, but it wipes out whole crops, and farmers can do nothing for it, nothing about it. So we see here the ground is cursed. I'm not a farmer. I'm just giving you like the little anecdotal things that I know, but clearly we see the ground is cursed. And who's it cursed for? For thy name's sake. Thou shalt not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. For thy sake. So cursed is the ground for Adam's sake. See, the consequence of sin is tied back to him. And the consequence of sin is that very thing that brought so much pleasure to him and to Eve, that very thing that brought forth that very tree they weren't supposed to eat of, is now cursed. And of course, we know they're going to be expelled from the Garden of Eden in a minute. But we're seeing a lot here. And God's telling a lot to the born-again believer today, that he is not playing around when it comes to sin, that sin is an abomination to God, that sin is such a serious, serious problem and curse that he had to send his only begotten, his beloved Jesus, to die on the cross and be buried 3 days and risen again to deal with that sin so that those that would believe could be saved. Sin is a very serious thing. We see it in the Garden of Eden. We see it with Adam and Eve and the serpent's punishment. We see what's happening here. And we're going to continue in the next episode to look a little bit more at Adam's punishment, because I believe, again, it's the harshest of the three, because he is responsible for this horrible occurrence. So tune in next time, and make sure you look the podcast up if you haven't already on your favorite podcast app. Thank you so much for listening. Take care. God bless, and amen.
Thanks for spending time with us today at the cafe. We would love to hear from you. You can email Brother Clark directly at clark@enduringpromise.org. See you again tomorrow. Same time, same place.